All right, Matt, we're talking about pacing tonight. So this is your one. I'll let you lead it off.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite things to talk about, actually, is pacing. So we're recycling, not recycling, we're upgrading one of my university lectures that I used to just really look forward to giving. So I think pacing is one of the most important things that we can talk about in sports, because like we're human and we have a limited engine that relies on food, and we can't do a lot of work. So we need to be able to optimize what we can do. So we'll talk about why it matters, what kind of pacing strategies there are. There are a lot of them. And then we'll look at some files and some things like that, and then talk about how we can apply it for our sports. So why does it matter? It's because as humans, we blow up or crack, or what kind of things do you say? Well,
yeah, those are pretty close.
Hit the wall.
Yeah.
So pretty much anything like that. That's why pacing matters. So also pacing matters because we have a limited amount of carbohydrates that we can use, and once they're gone, we have to slow down. So it's really important to utilize that appropriately, because we can't just take in more carbs and hope everything's going to be okay. Pacing is also important, like psychologically as well. We were talking about that earlier, Will, so maybe you'll want to talk about some things there. I also ended up leaving some lizard pictures in because
not relevant.
Yeah.
Yeah, psychological factors, like there's one I've been working on with the mental skills coach, Jay Barrett, sports psychologist. So like he's actually doing it as part of like some research as to, because I said to him, why is it that we know what is best for us? Like, especially in an ultra event, start slow. It makes so much sense. Just start slow. And then we know that, and we know the limits. Like, let's say it's 6-minute Ks, and then it's like, we just don't do it. Like on the day, like we just don't do it. And it become like, he wasn't really sure, and that's why he's researching it, because there's so many factors that go into it, like external pressures and whatever else is going through your mind, like just being sucked up in the environment of it all. But yeah, it's an interesting one, and I've just found a research paper that just came out at the end of last year, so it was probably just submitted but published recently. So I'm gonna get into that and probably delve into it a bit more. But really, it comes to like being prepared psychologically to like, what are you setting out to do? Because otherwise, like if you don't have that hard and fast plan where you can commit to your pacing strategy, but also like in the end, like think about the future. Like, actually, what is my end goal and what is my goal right now? So like, yeah, those are ones that are super important.
Yeah.
Strategies.
Yeah, you go ahead and talk about these. You found that that graph.
So I guess what generally happens is like right, where you start fast or with a high power output. So that's power and velocity on the y-axis, and start hard, finish slow, pretty much. And then there's other types where, I guess, depending on what you're doing, like, and what the duration and everything is, this is kind of ideal where you like speed up as the race goes on. This is very typical where you'll, especially if you're trying to pace well, you'll start hard, slow through the middle, get motivated by the finish, and then kick and finish hard again. Then you have like variable pacing. So that can, I didn't like, that can very be terrain dependent as well. And obviously, like if your duration becomes like what I have coming for me, like 24 hours, it's gonna look something like this if it's pretty condensed. Otherwise, it could be like very flat, where you kind of build into it and then find that specific intensity. So like I would there's also I don't know why this has an arrow, but even pacing, right? Where you just set out at your pace or power output, and that's you. You're good to go from start to finish. And like I think we all have to experience this once, but it's when we, whatever that saying is, like fool me once, fool me twice, fool me a third time.
Fool me every time.
Yeah. Then you need to look hard and fast in the mirror, like, damn, why am I always slowing down?
Yeah.
And often, like, I don't know about you, Matt, but when I started, I had over expectations of myself. Like I'd overestimate my abilities. Like, yeah, I'm really good, and I've been training really well.
This is going
And
to be the best day of my life.
yeah, and so I'd start and then feel really good. So I might even go even faster than what I thought was already an overestimation of my abilities, and then kaboom, and I'll be like, oh man, I wasn't training hard enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I pretty much always used to start with the race, and I could keep up with anyone at the start. I was like, man, I just need to be able to like keep up with them longer. Like, I don't know. I'd never really like considered that I was just going way too hard.
Yeah,
And
it revolutionized like my approach to triathlon. I was exactly the same. I'd be like, I was with the lead pack, like the guys who won the race for like the first 500 meters, and then I just couldn't hold on. Like I just need to train harder.
yeah.
Not thinking like actually they're better than me.
And they weren't going hard.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, that's just such a big trap. Negative.
Yeah. So this is like my favorite pacing strategy ever. So you take it easy at the start, and then you ramp it up at the end, and you get faster as you go. So negative splits. And it's like one of the best feelings that you could ever have in a race, but it's like the hardest thing to do because you actually need to hold back at the start, and no one else is doing that. So, but once you actually get dialed and then you start passing everyone at the end, it feels really good. And actually, throughout the race, the way that your body feels and the effort that you feel you're putting out when you do negative pacing and you get faster as you go, it actually feels much easier overall, and you're less sore the next day. And you could do another event the day after. You feel really good, and that's just because you started slower. And usually, people perform better when they do this as well.
Yeah, and like reduced rate of carbohydrate utilization. That's super important. Like for most of the stuff we're looking at when we're going kind of like, I guess, an hour, 2 hours and below, like carbohydrate becomes a very limiting factor, as does heat accumulation. But if we're just looking at carbs, if you start fast, you're straight into the carbs. You only have a limited amount of carbs. Now, like you've got another factor, nutrition, where you have to fuel correctly. And
But you
if
have to do that regardless.
yeah, I know, but like you can get away with it a bit, like if your event's 2 hours and you missed an aid station, if you're well trained, you'd probably get away with that, like them. If you've done this negative pacing, you're not using carbs in the initial stages at the rate that you would if you went out too hard. And so if you missed an aid station, it's like it's not optimal, but it's there's a bit of a margin for error there. You don't want that. You want to be making sure you're hitting every gel, every sports drink. But if you've gone out too hard and you've already started using carbs, whereas someone else who is starting slow isn't using them till halfway through the race, like now if you didn't, you're probably going to blow up anyway because like you are burning carbs too fast. But like if we just like looked at a graph like this, you imagine if like the square based line is like the limit at which you use carbs, and you head out at the black line, you're above that like that whole time, and so you're done. And so yeah, all out pacing. Now this
Worst thing you
works
could do.
sometimes.
Yeah, well, it does, but only for really, really short things. Right? Like, when would you ever use this for any other time?
No.
Yeah, okay. So the reason it works for like a really short event, like a 100-meter sprint, is because the proportion of time that you spend going really, really slow, it's such a big proportion because like you're not moving at all, and then you need to spend so much time speeding up. So if you're not going all out, you're leaving time there. But if it's like 3 minutes or more, it's probably the worst thing that you could do because you have to keep going. And for most of the events that we're doing, we're talking an hour, 2 hours, 10 hours, 24 hours, 24 days, right? Like you don't want to go all out right away. But yeah, this was actually a relevant lizard picture. So this was one of the Easter egg setups in this lecture originally, which we deleted most of them. But you can imagine like this lizard that runs across the water. And if he didn't go all out right away, he would just like fall into the water. But he's just going as fast as possible the whole time. So, you know, if we want to walk on water or at least run across it, maybe we could try that.
So what's this one, Matt? Positive. It sounds good. Positive.
Yeah, positive pacing. So is that when we start hard? What is there a graph that goes with this one? I can't remember.
There is. It's where you start. Yeah, for whatever reason, it's called positive pacing, which I think is not well named, but it's positive because the second half is slower than the first half. You know, like it's the opposite. It's just I think it's just named that because it's the opposite negative pacing.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
So positive pacing, I guess, can work with 800 meter. So the acceleration time, where you're like, what's shown here is that there's all this power output. So power is just a measure of energy over time. So you think about, you know, getting out of the blocks on a running race or on a track sprint. Then there's velocity. Like you're actually from a standstill, so you need to like overcome gravity or inertia or air resistance, whatever it is, in order to get up to the speed. So actually, a lot of this time becomes like getting up to speed. And without getting up to speed, you are actually like, if you tried to pace it, you would never actually get up to speed appropriately before like your energy stores or access depleted. But then what happens is like the thermal stress is so much, and there's like what they've found, Matt, like is in the ultra endurance is positive pacing pretty much is inevitable. Like you have to plan for it. You're going to slow down. Like what we were talking about with my 24-hour race is like you're slowing down. There's no two ways about it. You just can't speed up across 24 hours. So that's positive pacing, where like you're going to be going slower, and there's only a certain time. So you should never do it in like most events. Like it's just not. And but then obviously like if you have the benefit of drafting, that's helpful. Even's the way to go.
Yeah, even's the way to go. Like if you imagine like Zwift, under most circumstances, not when you're racing, I guess.
A treadmill.
Yeah. Okay. So a treadmill, like you just set it and you go, and you know how you feel. Like if you set the treadmill at something like pretty steady, you're like, okay, I can do this for like half an hour. And then you're like 10 minutes in, you're like, oh, actually, I might be able to do this for half an hour. You're like, oh man, now it's really hard. Like you're getting to that last little bit, and you finish it and you're like, wow, okay, that was really hard there at the end. I think actually that pace was perfect for me. And, you know, had it been a little bit faster, you wouldn't have made it. So even pacing is good, but it's probably not possible when we're around people. But if you're on the treadmill, that's
or on like a kicker or something that controls resistance. Or you know, the guy who just broke the 5K world record, 5,000 meter world record on the athletics track, he had a light system. So there's actually lights, LED lights that go all the way around the inside of the track. And so sort of like in dog racing, where they have a rabbit that shoots off and they chase it, he was able to just run to the lights. So they set the lights to the world record pace, and he just had to stay with them. There's no pacer, like there was a pacer, but there's like the pacer ran with the lights as well. There's no need for feeling the pace, and so he did a negative split like every single lap almost. He's like hundredths of a second faster per lap, but did it exactly as he was supposed to. So yeah, like an athletics track is one of those controlled environments, as is like a indoor velodrome. But out in the real world, trying to do an even pace would be really hard.
Yeah. I'm not sure what that paper was like. I think I was kind of talking about like if you pace wrong, so if you leave a little bit for the end, there's actually there's a mathematical limit, and like if you can catch the person in front of you, like like dang it, I kind of left too much in the tank. Now how can I go as hard as I can to catch that person? That's kind of what that paper was about. I think that's
in cycling.
Yeah, well, this was based on critical power, so it could be running or anything.
But with running, like in cycling, you may the factor of wind resistance is so high. Like you see here for the I think that's the 1 hour world record. He's going 54 k's an hour, and there's a potential that the person is not far ahead, but he would have to overcome from 54 k's an hour to maybe 58. Whereas in running, you may have the same time gap, 20 seconds, but the distance and the proportional speed and the air resistance that you have to overcome is like almost null, because you're going to speed like 20 seconds per kilometer, which when you're going 4 kilometers is like not a large portion. Like you can just sprint that down.
Yeah, right.
Whereas that guy like would have to exert so much power to overcome like the 20-second gap. Anyway.
Yeah. The parabolic pacing is probably more real world kind of stuff, which is like what we're trying to do when we're doing negative splits, that dark line. Like, yeah, I'm going to start real easy. And you just, it started way too hard because it's so hard to do this. And then you eventually speed up at the end.
Yeah, so this this gray one is ultra running.
Yeah.
So it's like this progressive decline across the event until you find the motivation of the finish. Like on average, that's what it looks like. And then this one like is the light gray, or probably the dark gray more so, or the black, sorry, is like your park run, like your 5K, or like, Matt, the local, like I think it's 12K or 16K 10-mile cycling time trial we used to do. It's probably more like the light gray. We shoot out, you're like, I need to slow down.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh no, I'm all right. And then you find it again. And it's not bad. Like it's how a lot of world records are broken. But the slowing down factor is important, so that it's not like this, you're trying to hold for so long and then a complete drop, which, is the positive pacing, which we've all been there.
Yeah, variable pacing is usually what we're doing if we're off road, usually, because if we're going all out and sprinting on a downhill, we're probably wasting a little bit of energy. So we're probably going harder up the hills and then trying to hold back a little bit on the downhills because they're so fast already. Like downhills, whether you're on a bike or you're on or you're running, like you're going quick. So to put out more effort down a hill, it's just going to affect your next uphill, and it's going to, make you more tired for that next uphill, which we don't really want, because uphills are so slow that going a little bit faster is going to make a big difference. So variable pacing is usually what we're doing, and then we can, yeah, that's it then.
Well, the same. See, with running, variable pacing can happen where, like, you're going to probably have to exert as much energy going down a hill to stop yourself, falling face first. But walking up the steepest parts, because again, when you're running relatively compared to like something like cycling, so slow to go, like if you're running really, really hard up a really steep hill at 7-minute kilometers, like, and that's 1K long, and it's like, in a, even something short like a 10K, right? Like, and then you walk at 10-minute Ks, and then you've lost 3 minutes, but you've barely, you haven't anywhere near overexerted yourself and you can get that by running a minute per K faster over the downhill and the next such and such, like just through walking, and so there's no pacing really about that. It's just kind of walking as fast as you can, as opposed to trying to like slog yourself up this like really slow run. And
yeah, I guess running's like pretty complicated because like you're sometimes going so slow that if you're running, you're just like bouncing and just like
you're wasting a lot
yourself.
of energy going up and down.
Yeah.
Like, and likewise, like you can really gain a lot of time on the downhills, but if that downhill comes at the first 10 Ks within 100 Ks, how much damage are you doing? How much time are you actually making up? It's variable, right? It's like just totally outrageous.
Yeah, so this was a study that looked at like, okay, so if we get people to go steady or they go do variable time trial, like what's actually happening. So if you go to so they had them do 3 trials, and the first one they obviously messed up because they didn't tell them anything about pacing strategy, and they went way too hard. Yeah,
down, and then
which is just what we'd expect because we all do that. And then they had them try these other pacing strategies. So the next one shows. The next graph shows like their time. So, you can see their time. So that first one, they were slower because they went out way too hard. Same distance, same everything. Their power was like the same though for every time trial, which is crazy. So people are always looking at, whether it's running power, cycling power, like this is it, and this is how you go faster. Like that's not actually it. The way to go faster is to apply this power at the right places. So with the variable power, they ended up going fastest.
Yeah,
which
20
is pretty
seconds
cool.
faster. That's interesting because that's similar to my run walk. Right. So
Right, yeah.
I measured power as well, and you'd think like, if you were able to hold the most power, like exert the most amount of energy per unit of time, like you'd win. But as you show here, yeah, like I ran start to finish, and I did a run walk, and like my power was lower, I think, on run walk, but didn't alter, like it didn't really affect anything. The fact that I was walking at a far lower power, and I guess they did the same thing here where they coasted for a while.
Yep. Yeah, so they were going harder up the hills. This one is probably a bit like I kept this in because like it's possible for us to like create the perfect race, and this has always been like my dream is to use someone's like what we know about them, like how they perform in the lab, and then like what the course looks like, and we can get them to basically be like a robot and optimize how they do this race,
like sub 2 hour.
Yeah, that's exactly. Well, that one they did a few things to optimize it, like no turns and things like that. But this we could do on hills because we know how hard someone can go up a hill, how long it takes them to recover, how soon can they do the next hill. So Will, for your next 100K, we could use this model and just like do the most perfect pacing.
Yeah, except I keep putting, we have Camelback, like you'll put 2 liters of water and drink it throughout a certain amount of time, so it changes dynamic. But pretty much, Matt, if I understand this correctly, the green line is like our energy.
Yeah, so that's like your energy reserve. And anytime you go hard, that energy reserve starts to go away. And you can see that going away as with the red one. That's like the person's power. So they go harder, that energy reserve starts to disappear. And once it like gets too far down, and this is exactly what we feel like, once that reserve disappears, then we have to go slow. We have no choice but to go slow, and that's exactly what happened at the end. And this is exactly how we feel when we're racing if we go too hard. And we want to avoid that. And probably in like 5 or 10 years, like we'll be able to have this algorithm on our watches, and we'll be able to like, yeah, pace perfectly. It's gonna be awesome.
No, we pretty much have that. Like we know, like I can tell someone to go do a power test or a 5K time trial, and you know their abilities, and then there's a distance, and you can work it out. Well, like you obviously have to be like this much less as a percentage, so start at this pace, and they go on the day, they'll be like, oh yeah, Will said this, but I feel better than that stuff. I'm going all in anyway.
Yeah.
And then like, and it doesn't work out. I've done it. That's what
Yeah.
I'm saying. Like, you know, there's
Yeah,
it's
because you have
like,
these, right? And you
yeah,
can look at it as you're
you can look
going.
at everything. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like, what do you think about Matt? You know, when you get to an event, so Paula Radcliffe, who until last year had the world record for the marathon, women's marathon. And she said, in my world record, I didn't wear a watch because I didn't want to look at it and realize I was running faster than anyone had in the entire world and think, well, I better slow down.
Yeah, well, I don't think most of us are going for a world record. She had that like as her main barrier, right? Like she didn't want to think how she was breaking the world record.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's so kind of like
That's a very
small,
unique
small
position
sample.
to be in. Yeah. But okay, so this one's pretty important. So for mountain bikers, which I'm going to talk about in a second, but also for runners, because like as you start to get tired, as you get closer to that fatigue, you start to make mistakes. And we've seen this a zillion times. And I had like the local club do this test where they go really, really hard and they do some math problems. And then they go not as hard and they come back and do some math problems. And like I get their time for that. And then they, you know, switch it around. And they were like equal time, like whether they went a little easier and then had to do something complicated or go really hard and do something complicated. It takes a lot of time. So this is what this study showed with swimmers. So their technique started to decline as they got tired. So for runners, you know, same kind of thing. So I was thinking about that with mountain biking. And then there's this guy, Aaron Gwynn, who won a World Cup downhill race, which we don't have to watch it, but he won a downhill race with no chain because he broke it at the start. Like,
So
how's that possible? Like, he couldn't pedal. So we started to look at pacing in mountain biking. And we had people just coast versus pedaling. And it was like exactly the same time. Even though their heart rate was way higher and they're breathing way harder, when they're pedaling, they didn't go any faster. So
I did that.
Yeah, you were in that one. Yeah.
Actually, I see Emma's here. I got her on a trail running technique course to walk the hills, and we kind of like timed it to show like the lack of, not the lack of effort, but that's I would consider it the same, Matt. Like where in mountain biking you can like pedal every single time, jam the brakes, pedal, like whereas in running you can like just kind of briskly walk somewhere like up a hill or thrash yourself to run and be toasted by the top, and then you get to the downhill and you're toasted again, like, you know. So you can't, and so now the technique thing comes into it. Now you're not as efficient, now you're taking bigger loads on your legs and you're banging yourself up all through like just a small increase in effort, like, and not really any gain in time. And yeah, I found that actually because I was doing run walk at the start of the ultra. There was this young guy who I was running with, and any hill I got to, not only was I doing run walk, but I had my heart rate limits, you know, at the start. And he obviously didn't, and he'd just run every hill, and then I'd catch him on every descent or like by the top of the hill, even though I was walking and he was running. Like I'd still, and I remember like we were talking for a lot of it, and I was like, "Oh, how are you feeling?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm feeling pretty hot, eh?" Like, and and this is, we were probably 30 Ks in, which is outrageous. 30 Ks is like still really far, but he's like, and unfortunately, I never looked at his name badge to see, because I tried to find him in the results, but it appeared like he finished a couple hours after me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which a lot of people did, like, I think I moved through like 30 places in that event, just through pacing.
Yeah.
Which like we did that podcast on, which I highly recommend anyone who's watching this have a listen to. We'll link it. So what's this, Matt?
That
This
is
is the downhill cycling.
yeah.
Mountain
So
biking.
that's graphs from that study, and we were measuring their VO2 and all that stuff. This is a fun game that we play. Like, name that pace. I can't remember the answer to this one though. Push the button so the line comes. This is the one I had trouble changing the line. I don't actually remember this pace, but so this is probably variable pacing, so you can see the power going up and down. It's probably a bit hard at the start, so that line would be like you imagine someone's threshold. So we all know what our threshold is, like what we can sustain for a really long time. If you go way too hard above your threshold, you're gonna kind of suffer, and you can see a little bit of suffering there in the middle and there at the end, where the power output is much lower than
compared to like all the peaks.
Yeah. So there's fewer peaks definitely by the end. Lots of peaks at the start. Yeah. So here's another name that pace. I think I have an animation on this one, so you give it a go. Yeah. Okay. So this one, there's another one. I think there should be an arrow, but so this one is, I think we'd call this positive pacing, where it goes really hard at the start and then declines after that. But if you're looking at heart rate, so pink is the power, up and down, up and down, up and down, and then the red is the heart rate. And like, if we're looking at our heart rate, it looks like this is the most even thing that we could possibly do. But in reality, that's not actually what's happening. This person went really, really hard at the start. They're suffering all the way through, but actually their power's kind of declining throughout.
Yeah, and that can be, especially, so this, this was only the first 15 minutes. Yeah. The power, like heart rate, is just kind of irrelevant for durations of that long, because who knows what it could be, like in terms of like, did you take caffeine? Is it a really hot day? Are you a heavy sweater? Like, did you get a good night's sleep? Like, is there a hill involved? Like, yeah, what kind of sport are you doing? And so for something like that, it can be really hard. Whereas, like, so what do we got here?
That's another name that pace. Yeah, so it was kind of like showing, okay, we don't know much about it unless we have a lot of information. You might be like, well, what the heck happened there in the middle? But the middle ended up being like a downhill. If we look at with the gray, with the elevation, like, okay, so this maybe wasn't a horrible pacing strategy. This was just like someone relaxing a little bit on the downhill and pacing pretty evenly most of the race, except for the start. Start's pretty hard.
Yeah,
that's not bad, right? Like, eventually, like, hit that point halfway through the first uphill where it's like, okay, I'm gonna settle in. So that's not bad.
Yeah, especially because you can see the massive power spikes, like while at the climbs and the finish.
Yeah, there's a nice like finish there. So that last long climb ish has lots of spikes, and then there's some big peaks on the final two pinches at the end.
Same with the recovery of the heart rate on the descent.
Yeah, that I always look at that when I'm looking at like an athlete's file. It's like, okay, if they blew up, their heart rate is definitely not going down on any of the downhills. So if it does go down on some of the downhills, you can see that they're recovering nicely.
Yeah, in control.
Yeah. So I think this applies to every sport. I think it's one of the most important things that we could ever do in any sport is to pace properly. Even in skill kind of team sports, you don't want to blow up in the beginning.
Yeah, it is everything. Like, it's everything you can put in like to your event, and just for the amount of people I see without a plan, like we go to a lot of events, Matt. A lot of different events, from like multi-sport events to pure mountain bikes to downhill mountain bike. Like it all matters. It matters from, like we showed, from kind of 3 minutes on. If you haven't thought about it and you're not measuring it, then yeah, it's it could be really bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was one. I just added that in because I was looking that up for my race upcoming.
Yeah. So how are you going to pace during your 24
So, well,
hours?
this was interesting. I'll just touch on this before we finish up. So you can see this is group. They've got group 1, 2, 3, 4, and what they did was they based it off of their ability levels. So group 1 over 24 hours had an average running distance of 180 k's. Group 2, 140, 120, and then just under 100 for group 4. And what they found was there was the slower the individual, the faster they started, like consistently. So you can see there, like the black diamond is group 4 and the black square is group 1. And so, like, yeah, for whatever reason, the least fit or capable the individual, the faster they started.
Wow.
And the slower they finished. Whereas the more experienced individuals still started too fast, but had this J shape, where by hour 12 they kind of had set their baseline pace. It's kind of like a critical power type of scenario.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's us for tonight. Any questions?